So in other words, the entire sort of East Asian and Pacific, region is very much conditioned by this sort of unfinished legacy of World War II, quickly wrapped into the Cold War, which Professor Yoneyama talked about in her talk yesterday. So I think those are the kind of context and backgrounds that I feel that I should put out here. And I should look forward to more conversation to happen. So if there's I don't know if there's really a project, but anyway, if there's one, feel free to pick it up. Thanks.
I wanted to go back to Oscar's point about locution and location, because I think it is critically important that these poems are being written in Honolulu. And if you think about that critical context where Japanese Americans dominate the state legislature at 40%, they're the ones controlling the media. And think about television representations of Japanese history and culture, they tend to focus, these programs tend to focus on the Japanese as victims who overcome adversity, they triumph, from the most humblest of in the most humblest of situations. And there is not this kind of understanding of this kind of atrocity, this history of atrocity. There's no, it's not something that we learn growing up. It's not in the textbooks. We don't learn about these things. And that's why I think, Professor Jaika's question, I think the response to that would be that people don't even know about these histories. These are histories either they never knew about or they turn away from. So that's why I really appreciate both of your work on this contemplative space that it opens up, because it actually asks people to look at things that they prefer to turn away from. And I think the important thing to remember is that this is ongoing. The sexual trafficking of women has never stopped. And so it's something that, to turn away from this historical moment that you're talking about, is to ignore the fact that it is ongoing.
Well, actually, I think I'm going to make the same point as Candice just made, because as a person who has been working on trauma narrative for quite some time, I think it's very important to bear witness. That's why I very much appreciate this session, with the presentation by Professor Lin and then by Professor Sato. I think I'm a believer of Shoshana Feldman's book, Testimony, as you believe in Scary, the Body in Pain. It's very important that, we record this kind of historical discourse, so that at some point, we have to think about the accountability of, of this kind of legacy. Everybody has to think about it. So, as someone who has worked on, I've been thinking about, doing something about Nanking Massacre, and then about comfort women, and then about partition narratives. For me, they are all very important issues that we have to think of. They are all very important legacies of war that we cannot forget. Think about the prices that we have to pay if we forget. It's one thing to forgive, but it's another thing to forget. We have to think about that all the time. That's my comment. But then I have questions, not really for our presenters here on the stage, but actually for people from the audience. Because as Professor Lim just pointed out, he's doing this poetry about Nanking Massacre as a Chinese American who's residing in Honolulu. And I'm very much touched by the image that Professor Sato points out, this traveling Shan, this like a traveling memory of some sort. I was wondering, whether this, and Professor Shan just mentioned, Ha-Jin and Zheng Hong is also writing about this Nanking Massacre thing. And I read a short story by Gayle. He wrote about the 13 prostitutes in Nanjing who, in the safety zone and saved this common school girls. They used their bodies as exchange to save the girls. The girls were housed inside the safety zone, but still the Japanese soldiers tried to, invade that space. actually, I would like to have Professor Guo Yingjian from China to tell us more if there's any other literary production or culture production, that is related to this, this topic, from the point of view of precocious testimony or Homeric obituary. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's a comment or question, but it seems to be very interesting the fact that Asian American writers, they seem to be very much interested between inter-ethnic conflicts in Asian countries such as conflict and Nanjing, Mexico, between Chinese American, between Chinese and Japanese, or between Korean and Japanese. Whereas they seem to be rather silent about what the US has done during the Korean War and Vietnam War and what they are doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I'm wondering whether one of the really interesting areas for Asian American scholars might not be those areas, as well as this between country areas. The previous about, as Manju said, 7 decades ago. Beijing.
Okay, first of all, I want to show my great appreciation for both of you for working on those kind of, contemplative space of the anti-Japanese and also these literary works. And well, in terms of this topic, I want to say 2 points. Number one, the history of anti-Japanese, is not even up to date, not so clear in mainland China. And I went to the Nanjing massacre, the museum, and we all know that we have the number of the 300,000. So when I was talking with my students and also the other people, and I was also having such a puzzlement to say that number is so accurate. So I thought the government should do that to calculate, to really seize the time for those people who are senior enough, who are old enough, and especially the relatives of the victims or the family, and to calculate who are really gone during their time. So we need to know, to memorize all these people who are the victims at that time. So historically speaking, that we need to do something for that. And number 2 is, I also very curious and also even sometimes upset by the literary works in mainland China. Because we have so many works about the anti-Japanese, literary works, but they're always doing what? They're doing how Chinese people during that time, anti-Japanese, and when they are fighting about that, and also they kill the Japanese soldiers, and then they felt very happy. So I was saying that, it's for so long time of the Japanese invasion to China, and also we are the victims. But the TV shows and also the movies and even the literary works always demonstrate that how Chinese people were fighting for very happily, especially after killing them. They don't have to show us the victims of their pains, of their trauma, of all of these stuff. So I was writing a very small article in the year of 2005 by questioning this. This is not enough. This is only the anti-part of that. This is half part of the history. It's not the whole history. We need to memorize that. We need to write down all of these. We cannot forget. So this is nothing to do, and theoretically speaking, about history, about whatever these kind of stuff. It's about how history and also literary history is written. So I do appreciate what Mr. Wing said, that